Lovely to see you all here. I'm Barbara Bernstein. I'm with Kibu Radio as well as being with Rumble on the River. And I'll be introducing you to our fine panel here. But before we start, Jan Zuckerman is going to do Atlantic Knoll.
For generations, the Willamette River was a rich, wild system of lakes, marshes, shallow wetlands, streams, forests, and wildlife, where many bands of tribes lived, fished, traded, hunted, and called home. These include the Kalapuya, Grand Ronde, Siletz, Umatilla, Warm Springs, and farther north, the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Malala, Yakima, and many, many other tribes who made their homes along the Willamette and Columbia rivers, living in right relationship with the land and the water. We honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants who carry on tribal traditions for present and future generations. We honor their care for this beautiful land, their resilience, their sovereign rights. We pay respect to the elders, past and present, who have stewarded these waters and lands throughout generations. We also acknowledge that a legacy of displacement, violence, and oppression has brought many of us to this land, and this system continues to perpetuate environmental racism, discrimination, and oppression. With this acknowledgement, we uphold our commitment to support these and all original peoples and work to repair the damage as we do our work. If you haven't had the opportunity, please support the Chinook Nation's push to regain federal recognition that was granted in 2001 and taken away 18 months later. You can go to chinookjustice.org to sign a petition or to donate.
Thanks, Jan. Well, today we're going to be talking about the unholy alliance of nuclear power and big tech, particularly the server farms that are serving nothing but AI. It's very odd to be talking about nuclear power in Oregon. Back in, you might remember, in 1979, there was a movie that came out called The China Syndrome, about a near meltdown of a nuclear reactor, sort of mythical, but actually based on a real nuclear reactor on the Central Coast of California. 2 weeks after that movie came out, there was the major meltdown at 3 Mile Island of, I guess it was 3 Mile Island reactor number 1, right outside of Hershey, Pennsylvania. And it was sort of like the movie came true to the worst, not the worst case, but it was a pretty bad case. And shortly after that, all the proposed nuclear power plants being, slated to be built in the United States stopped. And there were no nuclear power plants built for many, many years until actually quite recently. A year later, in Oregon, the voters passed by a very wide mandate a ban on any future nuclear power development in the state until there's a permanent nuclear waste repository in the United States, which means never. And at that time, there was 1 nuclear power plant in Portland, outside of Portland, Rainier, Oregon, Trojan, which shut down in 1992. But in the last few years, we've seen a renaissance, so to speak. I hate to use the term nuclear renaissance, which is the industry buzzword for what they hope is going to happen. But there's a hope of a renaissance on the part of the nuclear industry and probably all the other big evils that are out there lurking, trying to take away clean air and clean water in our healthy lives. And so today we're going to be looking at different aspects that focus here in the Northwest around this the latest nuclear technology that's called small modular nuclear reactors. They like to leave out the nuclear industry, so we forget that it's doing nuclear. So we're going to be talking about that in connection to the threat of AI. That the biggest threat being that it's the worst energy gobbler of anything I think we've ever seen on the planet. So the first person, before I start, actually, I just want to let you know that there are handouts up in the back by the door, and there's programs if you didn't get them, Rumble on the River. There's also a list of 13 out of the 15 proposed bills before the Oregon legislature to reintroduce the nuclear industry to Oregon. And then finally, nuclear power is not a climate solution. So these are handouts you can take home with you and study. So we're going to start
And please sign in if you haven't and you want more information.
Yeah, right, and also if you want to come up to Portland for our almost monthly rumbles, you sign the list and you get on the mailing list and let you know when the next one is, which will be actually March 20th at Havarash alone in Portland, Oregon. And we're talking about renewable diesel, right? Okay, another hopeful thing. So I want to start by introducing our first speaker today, who's Simone. She's a descendant of the Yaqui and Jicarilla Apache. She serves as a senior staff attorney and Hanford program director for Columbia Riverkeeper, where she works in close collaboration with the Yakima Nation to support increased public engagement in the Hanford nuclear site cleanup. Welcome. Thank you, Simone.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, our close sponsors. Some nice logos up there. Right.
Okay, we're past her now. Oh, here we go.
All right, just keep going?
Yeah, go.
Awesome. So, as Barbara mentioned, my name is Simone. I'm Jicarilla Apache and Yaqui from Kuthla and the Hanford Program Director for Columbia Riverkeeper. So who here has heard about Columbia Riverkeeper? That is a full audience. So you know, hopefully, so we're a water quality organization. We're a team of lawyers, scientists, organizers, and activists, all working to protect the water quality of the Columbia River and all life supported by it. So one way we do this is by providing oversight for the Hanford nuclear site cleanup. So we sit on the Hanford Advisory Board, we review cleanup plans, we bring information to the public and get folks involved and inspire the next generation to pick up the fight. So Riverkeeper was founded in 2000 in large part as a response to the presence of the Hanford nuclear site and the threat that this toxic legacy has for the river. It's known as the most contaminated and toxic site in the Western Hemisphere. So I think I'm happy to be going first because I think it's really remiss to talk about new nuclear development without first talking about the radioactive legacy that nuclear has caused in our region and around the country and around the globe, frankly. So really, I find that contextually, we need to frame the discussion about nuclear energy, not as some new technology, but really as this zombie idea coming back to life every several decades or so. The Hanford site really shows us the devastating damage of rushed nuclear development. So there's a lot of lessons that we should be learning from Hanford, and new nuclear development isn't one of them. So the bottom line that I'll start with is that nuclear has never made the world safer. It has never made the world safer or healthier, and it's certainly not the answer to our climate crisis. All right, so what are small modular nuclear reactors, or SMRs? So they're a type of nuclear reactor that's smaller than a conventional reactor. So they produce around 300 megawatts versus a traditional or older model, which produces around 1,200 megawatts. So they're built off-site and then brought to site and assembled, and they're usually assembled, or they're proposed to be assembled in packs of 4 to 12, I believe. So they may be small, but they're kind of a bunch of little farms, if you think about a nuclear farm. SMRs on and near the Hanford site are being proposed by companies close to the Columbia Generating Station, which we're going to talk a lot about later. So the Columbia Generating Station is the only operating nuclear facility in our region, and it's located on site at Hanford. And then most importantly, probably for my presentation, is that SMRs produce 2 to 30 times the radioactive waste of older nuclear designs. And when we're talking about this radioactive waste, it's important to remember that legally this waste is considered high-level waste and must be vitrified or turned into glass and then disposed of in a deep geological repository, which Barbara alluded to does not exist. And also for our purposes, the vitrification plant at Hanford isn't built yet. So two snags in in the solution there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Hanford. So this is a map of Hanford on site. SNRs are being proposed in that lower corner labeled the 300 area, which is about 10 miles from the city of Richland, which you can see down there. This is a map which shows the tribal ceded lands, and then if you look at the bends in the river, Hanford's like, kind of like up in the purple, a little bit of red. Yeah. So Hanford is a 586 square mile former nuclear site, former military site on the Columbia River. It's located on Yakima Nation ceded land, and the Yakima Nation, Umatilla, Warm Springs, and Nez Perce tribes all have treaty rights to the area. However, federal government infringement really infringes on these rights. So tribal technical and cultural expertise provides a guiding vision for the entire region when it comes to understanding the big picture of Hanford cleanup and what the future of this site should look like. So ecologically and environmentally, the part of the Columbia that flows by Hanford, which is depicted in blue on the site map, is known as the Hanford Beach. It's a really special area of Hanford, or of the Columbia. It's the last free-flowing section, so it's 50 undammed miles of the river, the last 50 undammed miles. So it's really unique habitat, and it's beautiful. It's full of wildlife. It's full of salmon, sand dunes, rare plants, you name it. It boasts some of the best main stem spawning for Chinook salmon in the region, and it's really beautiful if you've never been there. All right. So Hanford is where the U.S. government produced plutonium for atomic weapons during World War II and throughout the Cold War. So from 1943 to 1964, 9 reactors were built adjacent to the river, and they during operations, pumped water from the Columbia directly into the reactors, picking up whatever toxic radioactive stew, and then put that warm water right back into the Columbia. Here we see the U.S.'s insatiable militarism left behind a legacy of pollution that we are still dealing with today. Over those nearly 5 decades, Hanford produced 2/3 of the nation's plutonium, and plutonium production released hundreds of billions of gallons of liquid chemical waste into the soil and the groundwater on site. So everything that wasn't plutonium remains on site today, and this includes the millions of gallons of chemicals that were used to extract plutonium from spent nuclear fuel. So the U.S. government built 177 underground storage tanks to contain the most dangerous radioactive liquid material, and it's still on site today. So what didn't go into these tanks just went directly into the environment through these burial grounds and canyons that we have some photos of here. So when talking about Hanford cleanup and ideas to site new nuclear, new energy development on and near the site, it's really important to talk about the waste and start with the waste that would be produced. So every curie of radioactive waste created is here to stay in whatever amount, and it adds to our nuclear legacy and our burden that is a multi-generational burden that your kids will be dealing with at Hanford. So nuclear waste that remains at Hanford is both complex and very expensive. It serves as a concrete reminder of why we need to focus cleanup on not adding to nuclear waste burden and impeding the current cleanup that's happening, right? So siting new nuclear at Hanford is going to create long-term problems for cleanup, which is going to put both the Columbia River and the region at risk. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why the area that's being cited or being eyed for new development is particularly problematic at Hanford. So currently, I mentioned earlier, this is a photo of the Columbia Generating Station, so the only operating nuclear facility, nuclear power plant operating in the region. It's located in the 300 area, and this area in particular at Hanford has been rife with really complicated and surprising cleanup issues, which you don't want to have surprising cleanup issues and nuclear in the same sentence, right? So it's a really dangerous place to be considering for new development. So CGS itself in this location has already interfered with cleanup. So looking at the photo here outlined in the yellow, this is the 61811 burial ground, and it's partially located under the parking lot of CGS. So this burial ground contains highly radioactive waste, and cleanup of the source material conflicts with the operation of CGS. Namely, we need to keep workers safe when cleanup is happening, and so CGS can't be operating, right, if there's land disturbing activities happening around the burial ground. So this conflict has delayed cleanup. So in order to characterize the waste, which is located in the burial ground, the U.S. Department of Energy, which is responsible for cleanup, has to coordinate with CGS, and CGS has no cleanup deadlines, no obligations to clean up. And so we've seen this be really piecemeal and not happen. So current estimates have it that the cleanup of this site will begin in 2030.
Oh, cool.
So this map shows a groundwater plume below CGS and below the burial ground. The dark portion, which is more concentrating, so this is a tritium plume, which tritium is radioactive, is emanating from the burial ground and heading under CGS on its way to the Columbia. There's also a nitrate plume here. So the tritium plume is persistent and very high. It's over 50 times the drinking water standard. And several years ago, Energy assumed that over time, the levels would go down. However, we've seen them be maintained and in some cases spike, which means that the burial ground is an ongoing source of radioactive contamination here. And so until that source material is cleaned up, this groundwater plume is going to stay, and it's going to stay above drinking water standards and threaten the river. Okay, this right here, so these are groundwater monitoring wells in the area. You can sort of see the outline of 61811. So recently, the Department of Energy has expanded groundwater monitoring here, adding 2 new wells. And what it shows is that this burial ground is an ongoing source of radioactive pollution to the soil. This reading here shows is registering contamination over 20,000 picocuries per liter. And you can actually go online for any ground truthers out there to Phoenix and look up these groundwater wells yourself and see the data in real time, which is actually really cool all over the site. You can monitor ones that are actually in the Columbia as well. So cleanup near the Columbia is far from complete. This shows the deadlines for when cleanup will begin happening at 618, 11, and at the burial ground in 2030. So additional SMNRs proposed for this area could exacerbate these existing pollution problems. They can complicate and delay cleanup and add and increase our long-lived pollution burdens at Hanford. So Hanford is not a sacrifice zone. It's a place that matters, and we need to hold the federal government accountable to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act and the Atomic Energy Act, which prohibit Hanford from being a dumping ground for greater than Class C waste, for high-level waste, and for transuranic waste. Tribes and the public have been really successful in stopping many new proposals for off-site waste disposal at Hanford. And we don't want to be adding development here that's just going to add to nuclear waste when folks have fought so hard to make Hanford not a dumping ground for the country's nuclear waste. So SMNRs, just like nuclear reactors currently in operation, produce nuclear waste. I think that's the most important takeaway I have for you all. This waste is going to stay radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years and create a substantial burden for future generations. And really, I guess, yeah, what is the future for Hanford? I'll just end it by saying Columbia Riverkeeper supports a cleanup that honors the trees, a cleanup that's going to protect the river for future generations, for people's ability to hunt, fish, and use this area and shoreline safely. And SMNRs are really not a part of that future. So, thank you. Take action.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Next up is Damon Motz-Storey, who is he's the director, actually, of Sierra Club Oregon chapter. He represents nearly 58,000 members. For almost 10 years, Damon has supported environmental justice and democracy campaigns in the Pacific Northwest, including Oregon's 100% clean energy, clean electricity state law, and the 2018 ballot measure that created the Portland Clean Energy Fund. Welcome, Damon.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. I'm going to talk a little bit about just like a whole bunch of different little pieces of this very interesting phenomenon of nuclear making kind of a big comeback to the Oregon and Washington and indeed nationwide political conversation around energy sources. So I'm here to help contextualize that in a little bit of history, talk a little bit about the latest excuse to try to consider nuclear power in different areas, which is AI and tech and big data, and then also talk a little bit about just sort of like, okay, how have these specific proposals typically gone? Spoiler, not well. So that's going to help contextualize and give us a little bit more idea of what to say when you kind of hear some of those pernicious pro-nuclear arguments that may be coming from a good place, but there just isn't a lot of good, clear information out there. That's where I'm going to try to help out. Let's see here. There you go. So that's me. I'll just say really quickly, I've been in the role of chapter director for the Oregon Sierra Club for about 1.5 years now. We are working to kind of like rebuild back up after a period of time in the early pandemic days where we just were going through a lot, like so many people were and so many organizations were. And so that was a time of great turnover, but I was hired in 2023, and then we hired 3 full-time staff last year, and are going to be hiring 3 more full-time staff this year. And so we have, I just want to say very briefly, like in addition to those amazing staff that are in Portland, Bend, and Ashland, we also have volunteer leaders and members from every part of the state doing really amazing work to protect lands, water, and wildlife, but also advocate for environmental and energy justice and social justice. So hope you'll follow and support the work that we do, and maybe consider becoming a member or supporter if you're not already. So that's me. I've already said my piece about that. So I'm just going to go out a little bit and say, let's rewind a little bit and imagine ourselves in the middle of the 20th century. It's 1950s. We are in the sort of immediate aftermath in that period of time of one of the most devastating and atrocious acts of violence that the world has ever seen, which was when America dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the world has kind of now seen that the genie is out of the bottle. We are in the nuclear era, and also it's the Cold War, and there's a nuclear arms race that's happening with Russia, right? So there's a whole lot of different things that are happening. And basically, the nuclear industry is facing a bit of a crossroads where public opinion is tanking. But the US government really needs to be able to keep reactors going and continue to produce weapons and justify the existence of this industry. So how do you take something pretty intrinsically complicated, frightening, and make it marketable? How do you make money off of that nuclear technology? Well, if you're a powerful man or businessman or politician in 20th century America, you have to sell the American people on letting you spend a lot of money. And they did so by doing this Atoms for Peace campaign, right? To sort of like propagandize this notion that this technology could be used for good. Now, I'll also note that there are a lot of good applications of nuclear technology and radiation therapy in medicine that are wonderful and not at all disputed. But the actual act of generating electricity is, according to famed Indian environmental activist Vandana Shiva, the most expensive way to boil water, fundamentally. So not a great business model, and actually the Atoms for Peace campaign ended up leading to nuclear proliferation by exporting highly enriched uranium to 30 countries that didn't previously have it. So then, fast forward to the modern day, and we're still seeing a lot of nuclear propaganda. This is what it's looking like now. So it's being shoehorned into targeting the root energy problems, fueling climate change. But we should see this for what it is, which is just another attempt by the nuclear industry to keep itself alive, relevant, and profitable. Because the truth is that most nuclear plants currently operating in the United States are getting older and older, and they're wearing out and getting closer to needing to be decommissioned. The process of nuclear fission generates a lot of heat, and it creates a lot of stress over time on the various different pipes and machinery of reactor components. And there's only so many times that you can fix, repair, and do patch replacements on those kinds of things. And so we're not building a lot of new nuclear plants, and a lot of the old ones are getting older and more dangerous and in need of shutdown. So the industry is kind of needing to grasp for lifelines in order to keep itself alive. They claim we need nuclear power to get off of fossil fuels, but the reality has shown us that if we want to get off fossil fuels quickly, we had better not bet on nuclear, because it takes so long to get any new project off the ground. And it is an incredible environmental injustice to keep on running the reactors that we currently have. I'll get into some more of that later. But the recent latest excuse is big tech, data centers, artificial intelligence. And so, cryptocurrency mining and blockchain servers, all of this takes a lot of space and a lot of computing power. And already, Oregon's electricity grid is giving 10% of its power to just data centers, like this one shown in the picture, which belongs to Amazon Web Services in Umatilla County in north central Oregon. And so this part of the state is very interesting. The power demand just to keep all of the fans running and keep all of the computers cool as they're doing all of this intense computer processing work is gobbling up so much electricity that the small Umatilla River Electric Co-op that serves only like 16,000 customers is now one of the state's largest greenhouse gas emitters, because they are buying so much fossil fuel electricity off of the regional energy market to serve this Amazon data center. And so, this is what our current problem is. The latest sort of reason that the nuclear industry has said, we are a solution in search of a problem. This is the latest problem we're going to seek to fix, is to help satisfy the ravenous demand for energy that comes from these kinds of data centers. But here's the thing. Things have gotten a little bit disrupted on this recently. So just like the orca whales like to sink yachts, we've seen that the DeepSeek whale mascot of the Chinese artificial intelligence company has sort of upended the ship of American AI companies. What I mean by this is that when DeepSeek was launched, that was basically in the wake of China being cut off from a lot of American chip manufacturers. So they had to figure out, how can we do AI a lot more efficiently? And they did. And they released their platform, and they also released their methodology for how they were able to train their AI models using way less energy. And so DeepSeek is significant because it's not just a major competitor to American AI, less efficient AI models like ChatGPT, but because it's also helping other AI models do this with less energy. And so all of that means that this might actually be a big bubble that's about to burst, right? All of the big claims of increased demand for electricity from all of these new uses of artificial intelligence. What DeepSeek is showing us is that probably this technology is going to get more energy efficient over time, and that is going to lead to some of these new demand projections to be overblown. Just as a quick note, there are a lot of other impacts from the big, sort of scramble for new electricity going on right now. And this is, I just said this one, so I got a little out of order with my slides, but there's the actual quote about the Umatilla Electric Cooperative. It's 1.8 million tons of carbon emissions they're now responsible for annually in order to serve Amazon. And in Portland, where I live, we've been working to spread the word around a huge infrastructure project that Portland General Electric is proposing, we think, to serve a lot of the big tech and data center industries in Hillsborough, Beaverton. So that threatens about 400 mature, hundreds-of-year-old trees in our Crown Jewel Park. And so this is something that, if you live in the Portland area, I hope you'll tap into this and get engaged with this campaign. And it's just yet another example of the ways that AI and big data are kind of crunching us, and we need to get aware about it and fight back. But now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the history of some of the nuclear plants in the United States. Raise your hand if you have heard before of the Washington Public Power Supply System. Yeah, okay, so fewer hands raised than when we wondered about Columbia Riverkeeper. And that's because they don't exist anymore. They have rebranded. They're now called Energy Northwest, which sounds a lot better than whoops, which is what the acronym was. And this is very significant because it was a big whoops. Basically, I'm going to try to summarize this in a nutshell, but this ended up being the second largest municipal bond default in American history at $2.2 billion default. So this was basically a group of publicly owned power utilities in Oregon and Washington, including Seattle City Light and Eugene Water and Electric Board. They're all part of this kind of consortium. And the consortium said, we're going to build 5 new nuclear plants, and it's going to be so cheap that we're going to basically bond all of this and then pay back all of those bondholders. Well, when the settlement was reached, those investors got back about 40 cents on every dollar, which was not great. About 35% of electricity costs from ratepayers that are being sourced by the only one plant that ended up being built, about 35% of your energy bills are going to either the one nuclear plant that was built or the 4 that were not built and were still like partially built and incredibly overly expensive and behind budget. The original plan, and this is, by the way, the Columbia Generating Station is the big picture here that Simone already talked about. But these 2 here were 2 of the other plants that were built 75% and then abandoned, never finished, in another part of Washington state. And altogether, this ended up being, the initial cost estimate was $5 billion, and then the actual construction cost skyrocketed to $24 billion. And after 36 years of selling power at 1/3 of a cent per kilowatt hour, Bonneville was forced in 1974 to raise rates by 27% in order to pay for all of this. And again, we're still paying for it today. Another case study that is much more recent comes from Oregon State University's own NuScale Power Company. They attempted to sell a new small modular nuclear reactor design. Again, none of those have been built in the United States yet. They're all just speculative. But it was similarly financed to a bunch of Utah municipal electric utilities. The timeline estimates increased by 10 years and costs rose from a couple billion to almost $10 billion just for one project, totaling about 720 megawatts. That is not a great price for serving about 700,000 people for $9 billion on one project. So the project was canceled and the plug was pulled in 2023 after too many of the municipal utility investors jumped ship upon realizing that the economics were really bad. This was widely seen to be the furthest along and most likely to be built small modular nuclear reactor project in America, and now it's gone. Just also to contextualize that our friends in the southeastern part of the United States pay for the most expensive electricity in the world. That is right, in the world, because of Plant Vog Toll 3 and 4. They took 15 years to build, and they cost $36.8 billion. Just these 2 reactors, costing ratepayers $10,000 per kilowatt, compared to about $900 to $1,500 per kilowatt hour of wind, solar, or gas. A separate analysis shows that Georgia Power customers should expect roughly an increase of $35 per month on their electricity bills after an average of only $15 a month. So just truly staggering, incredible cost overruns, and this was just the most recent nuclear construction project in the States and was the only successful one in the past couple of decades. So I'm going to summarize just to finish up real quick. Sierra Club for 50 years has opposed nuclear power and reaffirmed that policy last year. And I just want to lift up that part of the reason that we do oppose it is because even if there weren't all these economic issues and undemocratic issues, it would also be just a tremendous environmental justice problem because of every step of contamination of the nuclear fuel chain, which I'm going to just show an example of. So this picture on the left here and on the right, is the Puerco River on Navajo lands in southwest US. And in 1979, when we were all looking at and paying attention to the 3 Mile Island disaster in Pennsylvania, that same year, the Church Rock uranium mill had a spill into the Puerto River that actually ended up releasing even more radioactive contamination than the 3 Mile Island disaster. And it happened in the same year, and you probably haven't heard of it because it happened on indigenous lands. And so I highly recommend that you take a look at the Church Rock uranium mill spill. It's an important event in American nuclear history, and it showcases that even if all of the reactor stuff goes according to plan, the process of mining and refining this uranium and then dealing with the waste is still an unsolved environmental injustice issue. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Damon. And now, we're going to hear from Kelly Campbell. And she brings more than 25 years of experience in environmental health and social justice to her role as a policy director of Columbia Riverkeeper. You've heard about them before. How many people know or heard of Columbia Riverkeeper? Okay. Where she works with a team to develop policy strategies and advocate at the local, state, and federal levels. Welcome, Kelly.
What am I doing? Oh, this will just happen?
No, you have
I'm gonna use the notes. Okay,
to scroll down.
okay. Hi, everybody, how you doing? Indoors on this sunny, beautiful afternoon. Oh, I have to talk into the mic. Yeah, thank you for being so committed to having this discussion about the problems with nuclear power. Whoops, how do I do this? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in real time. We have some exciting and weird updates about proposals to build new nuclear in Oregon. So we're talking about these new bills to build new small modular reactors in Oregon and how we're going to stop them. And we do have stickers in the back of this image here. If you want to take one, me go. Oops. The wrong way. So some of this has been covered, but these are kind of 5 truths that we've been talking about that people really need to know about small modular nuclear reactors. The first is that small modular nuclear reactors are an unproven technology. None of these have ever been built in the United States, and worldwide there's really only 3. There's 2 in China and 1 in Russia, and all of those are underperforming. Now it's interesting because if you read the news, it makes it sound like these things are being built and they're happening and they're everywhere and it's the latest and it's super cool and all the big tech companies are into it. Well, maybe the big tech companies are into it, but these things do not exist. And so these are only speculative designs. None of them have been built. And a lot of people are surprised, especially pro-nuclear people are surprised when they hear that in folks that I've been talking to, including Oregon legislature yesterday. Number 2, nuclear power is not clean energy. As Damon alluded to, from the uranium mining and the milling that decimates indigenous land, all the way to the nuclear waste at the end, we have no safe, permanent repository for nuclear waste, or nuclear power may not emit a whole lot of greenhouse gases, but it is a dirty and outdated technology that has no place in a just transition to a clean energy future. So there's really nothing clean about it. And I think that's important for folks who are talking about, well, maybe nuclear can help us with the climate crisis. It's like, look at the waste, look at where it comes from, look at the injustice all the way along. I did it the right way this time. Third, and I think Damon stole my thunder on this one, but nuclear power is the most expensive way to boil water. There's reputable studies that are showing it's at least 5 times as expensive as renewable energy. And as Damon gave some examples, the nuclear reactors are notorious for their cost overruns and for taking much longer than expected. So not a solution that could help with anything anytime soon. 4, baseload is an outdated concept. A lot of people like to talk about baseload. Well, we need firm baseload power, so we need nuclear. It's really not something we necessarily need anymore with the new grid and storage technologies, with new types of battery coming online. There's not really the need for, quote, baseload or firm power. It's not, we're not operating in a world where we're just burning a lot of coal and solar and wind are these sort of extraneous weird things. We're really moving off of the idea of baseload. The other thing to think about, and you can look at the Columbia Generating Station and see, like, there's a lot of times when its outages are not planned, or its outages are much longer than we're planned to be. And so even if you do think there needs to be some baseload, it's not actually a great, it's not really a very reliable form of baseload power. And 5, the tech company hype is a distraction. So I think most people have probably seen in the past year, I guess it was last fall, maybe it was last October, that Microsoft, Amazon, a bunch of big tech companies, all within a week of each other, were all like, hey, we're going nuclear. We're either, really excited about these SMRs, or we're going to reopen like 3 Mile Island. It's going to be great. And then there was a week after that, the Biden administration announced a whole bunch of money for nuclear. So I don't think any of that's a coincidence. But I think what it is it's a little bit of a magic show, right? For big tech companies, many of whom have these pledges to go 100% clean, for them to be able to say, like, look over here, like, we are supporting clean nuclear that won't be built for at least 15 years at best. Meanwhile, they're continuing to use fracked gas, other fossil fuels to power their data centers now. So I think, we really need to call them on that's not, it's not an acceptable thing to be doing. Measure 7 was talked about a little bit. Measure 7 is the current law in Oregon. There is a moratorium on new nuclear reactors that's been in place since a ballot measure in 1980. I was in the 2nd grade. Now I have gray hair. It's been a while, so maybe we do need to talk about nuclear. We do need to talk about nuclear. But hey, guess what? In that law, it says that there cannot be any new nuclear reactors built in Oregon until there's a federally licensed permanent nuclear waste repository. That's what people were asking for 45 years ago. Do we have one? No. Are we any closer to having one? No, we're not. So maybe that can be the end of discussion right there, right? We've got nuclear waste that we have no safe way to deal with. So why would we ever make more? And then secondly, the law requires another vote of the people of Oregon to overturn this moratorium. These details are important because we're about to get into the 13 bills that have been introduced in the Oregon legislature this session that relates to promoting nuclear power. It's flood the zone, right? It's like what's happening at the federal level, like just throwing out, just sort of vomiting these 13 bills rather than having a couple that make sense, or that are somewhat logical. But yeah, the Oregon legislature right now is looking at 13 bills. We're gonna look at some of them more close up. So I've grouped them because there's really no need to talk about each and every bill individually. There are a bunch of repeal the moratorium bills. So these are various attempts to overturn Oregon's moratorium on new nuclear power reactors, even though we still don't have a new national waste repository. Some of these bills put it to a vote, back to a vote of the people. Some of the bills just have the legislature do it. There are 2 of these bills being heard next Wednesday in the Senate Energy and Environment Committee. Those are SB 215 and SB 216. So SB 215 is a bill that says, let's put it back to a vote of the people again. SB 216 is a repeal the moratorium bill that just has the legislature repeal the moratorium without a vote of the people. Note that these bills have only Republican sponsors. Mostly David Brocksmith I think he's maybe sponsoring all of them. He just dropped a whole bunch more that are like super similar to the ones he did before. So it's, anyway, whatever. But one of them does include Minority Leader Drazen is on one of them. But so, yeah, these are very much Republican supported. However, we have, a Democratic chairs that are allowing these bills to be heard and are not saying that they're not going to allow them for a vote. So I think we're facing a little bit more serious attempt to overturn Oregon's moratorium than we've faced in a while. Here's a fun one that Damon and I were in Salem talking about yesterday. This, and Cathy as well. I'm calling it the Umatilla County Exception Bill. It basically says, yeah, Umatilla County can build a nuclear power plant without overturning the statewide moratorium. I don't know personally, I'm not a lawyer, but I do know lawyers. I do think if you have a statewide moratorium that one county doesn't have to do, then you kind of don't have a statewide moratorium anymore. What's that? They could, but yeah, that would not be fun. So this bill was heard. It does have two Democratic co-sponsors, Representative Emerson Levy, who is on the House Climate, Energy, and Environment Committee, spoke in favor of the bill, and Senator Mark Meek is also a sponsor along with a bunch of Republicans. And there's a couple pro-nuclear study bills. So there's a Senate bill that directs Oregon State University to conduct a feasibility study on nuclear energy in the state. That one is also going to be heard on next Wednesday in the Senate Energy Environment Committee. And then again, yesterday, there was another bill heard in the House Committee, which is HB 2038, which requires the State Department of Energy to do a study on nuclear waste. It's pretty silly if you read it. It's not even attempting to be written as an objective study bill. It talks about things like studying the advantages of nuclear energy, but not the disadvantages. So there are legislators on that committee who are working on potential amendments to at least, it's like, okay, if we're going to study it, let's at least have an objective study and not just go into it with studying the bias thing. But again, all of the sponsors on these two current bills are Republicans. And then there's another one that doesn't have a hearing set yet that gives tax credit for energy producers, including folks producing energy from nuclear power and fossil fuels. So I don't know what's happening with that one. That one hasn't been scheduled. Hopefully that one's not really going anywhere. So what can you do? You can contact your legislators right now because we don't know. Some of these bills may go to the House floor or the Senate floor. So I don't think it hurts to contact your own representatives right now and let them know hey, no way, we don't want any of these pro-nuclear bills. We also have, and I'm sorry I didn't put a QR code on here, if you go to ColumbiaRiverkeeper.org/petitions, you can sign our petition, which we will submit as written testimony next Wednesday in the Senate committee, making the point that these bills do not need to pass. If you represent an organization, please come up to me later and I can send you the link to sign on to an organizational sign-on bill opposing new nuclear. And then based on what happened yesterday with the hearings in the House, there were a ton of people who came in person and there were a ton of people who got online to testify, and they called it and didn't let everybody testify. So I'm going to suggest if you really want to weigh in on the Senate side bills, and I hope that you do, that you write written testimony. And there's a cheat sheet in the back that has a bunch of these same talking points. It doesn't have to be long, but I think having a number of people signed up in opposition on the written testimony would be super, super helpful. And if you don't know who represents you, you can go to this website, OregonLegislature.gov, and look them up. And you can also subscribe to bills you're interested in following. But yeah, this is all going down right now. And we really do need everyone's help to make sure that these bills do not get out of committee, do not get onto the floor, do not in any way, shape, or form get passed. So that is it, and that's how to reach me. Thanks so much.
I wanted to add to that line about how nuclear power is a very expensive way to boil water. I heard a column I read for that a number of years ago where somebody compared nuclear power to boil water. Nuclear power to generate electricity is like using a chainsaw to cut butter. So we have one last speaker. I'm very pleased to introduce, Wallulapum, Cathy Sampson-Kruse. She's a wife, mother, grandmother, Ulla and Kuthla. And she lives with her husband on the Oregon coast and hopes to someday build build on our homeland, the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla, Wallulapum, and Cayuse. She's advisory board member for the CLDC Eugene, member of affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, and a member of Stop Nuclear Work Group. Welcome, Cathy Sampson-Kruse.
Ini manamima shikukna shwa pina klausha mechsimit iwa Weyoy'sux I Kataya Pusha I Kataya Kuthla. My Indian name is Old Weyoy'sux. My English name is Cathy, Sampson-Kruse. Our Wallulapum people are the smallest of the three tribes, the Wallulapum, the Cayuse, and the Umatilla. It sounds like you've heard our Umatilla name thrown around in many different ways today. Some good and some not so good. It's good to see so many people here. And hopefully you're all anti-nuclear. I'm sure there might be a few infiltrators in the room, and we welcome you. Just don't do too much facial recognition on us. I'm probably going to need a little bit of help on this. I'm not too techie. Where do you want me to start?
We got that one?
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh, there's our treaty map. So this is one of our fancy GIS maps from the tribe. And you know, tribal people are always a little territorial, if you will, about who's who in the maps. I saw Simone's maps, and you know, the Yakimas kind of creep into the Walla territory. And there's a whole story about, you know, well, that really should be our part of the world. But, you know, we have relatives there now. So, you know, intermarriage happens a lot. And Nukes kind of came down from the north and intermarried there. And Wallulapums came up. But we all try to, you know, put those things aside, especially when we have grandchildren together. Boy, life goes on. I'm retired. I come to these things on my own dime, sponsored by my dear husband and, you know, American Express or MasterCard. And I'm lucky enough to still serve on a couple of small boards that help get me out of jail or, you know, I love being a part of. Yesterday was interesting. If you've never testified before the Oregon Senate or House, you should. You never know what's going to happen. Has anybody been there, testified? Yeah. It's really the suits and the shiny shoes guys. They always have their playbooks ready, and the room is almost always stacked. And you just got to be ready for that, you know. Thank goodness that our governing board, I'm talking about the SMNR issue at Umatilla County, who had the good slide, Kelly did. I guess, you know, we have the powers that be that we think we can have one in our backyard, right? Umatilla County, y'all know where it's at? Y'all know where Pendleton is? Yeah, Roundup, yeah. 200 miles down the gorge. I don't know what they're thinking. Do you think they came to the people to speak about it? No, they didn't. I guess there might be some discussion now with our board of trustees. But have they come to the people of the tribe? Have they come to the general council to speak to us? No, there has been no discussion. There's been nothing in our tribal newspaper about it yet. So it's really quite a mystery, if you will, what they're thinking. But their paid attorney made quite a case. I want to talk just a little bit about why we stand in solidarity on some of these issues and why many of our ally people that we trust, why we stand in solidarity with them, like our folks on this panel. We stand in solidarity to uphold what we call the Creator's Law, and that's called Tamanwat. We don't campaign. We don't call it usually a protest or some liberal outlash. It's usually not about me or you. It's usually about what we call the unborn. It's usually about the ancestors. It's usually about the first foods that are set on the table, and that is the water. And in every meal, when the first foods are laid out, we always end the meal with water. So when our people across many, many beliefs say that the water is life, that really is what we're saying. So to know the beauty of those sacred foods, it's not only the fish, that so many things have happened along the way. It's about the traditional ways of gathering the different berries and roots and medicines. I'm going to go to the next slide. Oops, is it this one? Oh, sorry. Okay, I don't want to dink it up. So this man is, when someone passes, we say Atwe. This man is Atwe Chief Jim Kanaini. There's an entire ridge, huge mountain ridge named after his family. When you go down the beautiful Nichiwana, the big river, Columbia River, a long time ago, long time ago now, there was Celilo Falls. If you have ever seen the old history of Celilo Falls, he was one of the men, and there were many with the women that tried to stop the Dalles Dam from being built. He went clear back to DC, and they said, "We don't want your money. We don't." They tried to negotiate for several years to try to get it stopped, but obviously it didn't happen. Next slide. The woman in the middle, who doesn't have a hat on, the elder woman in the middle, again, when I talk about negotiations from those treaty days of 1855, is his daughter. When we talk about treaty negotiations that are happening, again, fish wars, this is Atwe Edith McLeod in the middle. She is Edith Kanaini McLeod, one of our respected elders who is now gone, who taught me and I'm sorry, I don't want to cry about her, family a lot. And on both sides of her are the Bridges McLeod family. There was big fish wars all along the Big River and up into Nisqually. And you'll probably can read about some of those wars, but what I'm trying to get across to you is how much women were as involved and sacrificed for their families. And the man standing is, my children consider their uncle, Mike McLeod, who worked for years in our tribal fisheries program. I push this forward. Does anyone know this man? You do? This is her brother-in-law. They called him the senator with much respect because of the years and years of dedication and work that he put in, protecting the riverways and the rights of so many treaty people. His older brother was Otway Edith Kanani McLeod's husband. What I'm also trying to get you to understand is the interrelationship of tribal people that cross so many boundaries, not only in small tribes like ours, but all across the Pacific Northwest and into Alaska or far-reaching back east. He was not an elected official. She was not an elected official. I am definitely not an elected official. But people have different roles to play, and he definitely had a role to play. His son is now an elected official of the Nisqually Tribal Council. He's someone that, if you're interested at all in tribal history and politics, is, you know, someone you should read about. He also has a famous saying that I hold dear to my heart. He was a mentor of my younger brother, Don Sampson. He says, everyone thinks hydropower is cheap and clean. Just ask a fish. Every time you turn on that light bulb, there's a fish that sacrificed himself. I didn't mean for this to have this little thing on the top. Didn't mean to brag about, yes, that's our daughter. I didn't mean that's supposed to be like, shut off. But it's the only one I could find. Just like, I told her, honey, do you mind if I use that? She was supposed to cut that off. Anyway. My dear husband and I raised 8 children. She's the oldest daughter. So when we talk about treaty rights, and I'm coming full circle to water and SMNRs, what she's holding up there is roots. It's what were we digging that time? I think we were digging chauche. It's a biscuit root. Why she's doing that is I'm further over on the other side, and we call it when you get a really big one, and you better not have stabbed it with your cupping. She's holding it because it's a big Kuthla one. Yeah, I got a big one. And we're getting ready for our first foods ceremony to feed the people. I think it's anywhere from 200 to 300 people we would feed at our feasts. There are several feasts. In fact, I think they're getting ready for a celery feast. A lot of tribes, especially with this weather right now. I put this one up here because I want people to have some historical perspective about this is the year, 250 years of these folks, BPA. And why is she doing this? Well, because they have a long history with mapping us. If you look at their site, back east, they began with their mappers, and sent them our way to map the rivers and follow the journals of Lewis and Clark and see what's all those Native people doing out there. And they mapped us, and they wanted to chart to see where they're going to put their railroads and how are they going to do that. And we're still dealing with them today. And if you've seen the latest, what 47 wants to do next, well, guess what? If you didn't read Project 2025 or 2025, well, who knows what he's going to do next, but they're probably up to something. Next slide. When we talk about being respectful of tribal consultation, when we talk about back to the meeting, not the meeting, the House bill hearing, when we talk about tribal input, when we were all sitting there together and I saw that finally, after months of sending my tribal leaders information and emails and like, did you get that? Did you get that? Or did it go in a circular file? You know, the email trash. Phone calls, going to affiliate tribes of Northwest Indians in Portland. Senior tribal leaders there saying, this is gonna happen, we've got to be ready for this. Knowing that the funding came down from the Biden administration, knowing that the representatives in Eastern Oregon, we've known they've always been Republican. We know that, you know, things were lined up against us. You could see the photo ops were happening, right? They always want to be there for the photo ops. They always want to shake Indians' hands somewhere, you know? Tonight, they're going to sponsor a powwow with us. So finally, when Board of Trustees member finally got back to me and said, it's going to be good news. We're drafting it. I'm like, okay, send me a draft. And I didn't get any word. I'm like, where is it? And I told Kelly in a meeting, okay, it's going to be good news. And then finally we see him online, right? We see him. The person online. But you never know in these hearings if you're going to get called. And you see what's happening before you. You see that the pro folks are lined up and getting all the time. And you see the dismissiveness that's happening and the joking. And it's really pretty disheartening and it's pretty disrespectful. And I remember talking to my mom, and this is Mom. And the elders gave her this name, one who does things right. You know, she's still alive. This is next to my dad's site. And she is one of the most strongest people I know. She has gone through a lot. Can you imagine being a white woman going through as much as she has back in the day when in Pendleton, Oregon, there was on the books, you couldn't even be together walking down the streets as young people. Being in North Hill in Pendleton, Indians couldn't even live there. Back when I was little, we were the poorest. And now, all of a sudden, Umatilla County, our tribe is the largest employer. But do you think anybody in that room yesterday wanted to say that? Those commissioners? Bobby Levy, who said she represents us? No, there was no respect there. So when I had to get up to speak, did I have to speak to that? That was my truth to say. And when our Board of Trustees opposed this, I was like, yes. I was like, thank you, Creator. Thank you. That's what I needed to hear. That's what I needed to hear. That's when I know that there's still hope, that there's still hope, and that even though there's billionaires out there, you know, there's still us in here. You know, there's still power in us if we continue to have hope and we just keep doing the right thing. So with that, and I always tell them, I always try to say, this was us. You see this? This was us. This was in front of the Umatilla Indian Agency, these little girls. And this was 1932. It's my grandmother. And I said, we're still here. It's called Kwali Samchana. We're still here and representing in different ways. So I ask you, sign up. If you're a registered voter in Oregon, you gotta step out there, step out of your comfort zone, you know, do the right thing. Yeah. Good? Yeah? All right.
Thank you, Cathy. That was wonderful. Well, we've got time for some questions. We don't have a lot of time, but you first want to raise your hand.
Two things. One is, I think using the word cleanup for Hanford is a misnomer, because you cannot turn off nuclear waste. It's not physically possible, even if we had Bernie Sanders and Greenpeace from the federal government. I think the real cleanup will be the next Missouri thing. In my opinion, I've seen it. The other is, I think, tactically, strategically, if we want to stop new nukes, we have to call for using much less electricity. Electricity does not flow from some magical place. The single largest source of energy for electricity in the western U.S. and the U.S. as a whole is fracked natural gas. We're not building dams. Most of the new power stations being put in are gas, including one at Boardman, that's burning gas. And I've used solar since 1990. It's good. It's not going to replace our overconsumption, even with batteries and Teslas and all
Okay,
that.
do you have a question?
Can we talk about limits to growth in the finite plan?
What do you want to understand? Limits to growth in the finite plan?
I think the main thing, and I want to make sure we can get to some other questions too, but thank you. I think the main thing is that part of the reason nuclear is not a climate solution is because of how slow it is. And the fastest way to drop our carbon emissions is through energy efficiency. It is the fastest tool in the toolbox. It is to use less and be more efficient, and that is important from so many different angles. So I think it's just important for us to really emphasize that we need to use less and also go after the big guys. Go after the big guys who are using so much electricity and energy to enforce policies that require them to be more efficient.
How do they cut our consumption of energy?
Can I add something on a question?
Sure, yeah.
Go online and find the Federated Tribes and Umatilla Indian Reservations submitted testimony yesterday. It has a line in it about global consumerism masquerading as economic development. And I thought that was a really powerful line.
I think, this is one of the things that I'm really concerned about, and I think it's really what we need to talk about, is like not going down this AI pipe dream. And that we really need to conserve, we need to look at what we really need, and to probably let go of a lot of stuff that we don't need. Yeah. Yeah, you.
I have a question. Is anybody thinking of or putting forth geothermal energy for these new AI facilities as a requirement, on-site geothermal before they're born or constructed, or what you call it? So they would have their own on-site, not grid-tied, and that would be probably as clean as it can get. I don't know that we can stop the industry, quite frankly. But I'm just curious if anybody is looking at that.
Well, I think just to table set real quick, there is no morally, ethically pure way of generating electricity, period. There just isn't, right? So like, let's disabuse ourselves of that notion first. And then also, geothermal, it's not a technology I'm super familiar with. It really can only be done in certain locations, and there are various impacts that come from drilling and things like that. But I think far better than sort of saying, how do we give dedicated power sources to these big data centers, is to instead require them to pay their fair share for infrastructure and energy, and put checks and balance and limits on how much they can expand, and make sure that we have a really distributed set of energy resources that can be flexed around using really responsive grids. I think that's one of the most important things. It's not just to put all our eggs in one basket of one type of power generation.
Just to answer your question directly, I would say no, I haven't heard of any of these data centers really calling out geothermal. It's possible, but yeah, I don't think that we're not seeing that.
Yeah, I always went too late, but I really think we need to be calling out, do we need these data centers? I mean, I did a show on cable a while back, and it was called Nukes for Needless Energy, because I think most of this is needless energy. We have to really look at what we need. Lynn?
Yeah, real quick, Simone, for you, I was at a town hall with my representative Meeks, and I didn't realize until 5 seconds before that he was co-sponsoring his nuclear bill for Kuthla, and I called and said things, and he jumped back at me, and then had to move on, but he was like, I learned that so far there's only a half a football field worth of nuclear waste in the world, so it doesn't matter, it's not important. And I mean, it's the worst greenwashing ever, but do you know of any good resources for talking points back, so how many, teaspoons does it take to kill a city, or, whatever, what are those? I thought you might have that.
Well, I'm an attorney, so numbers I don't know if I can give you the right numbers. Yeah, I don't know, I think when talking about Hanford, we can start by saying there's 56 million gallons of liquid waste in those tanks alone that I mentioned. So I think that's really outweighs the football field right there. But I think online, if you go for how much radioactivity, how much the dose limits are set, you can find those pretty well as soon as you turn off the AI notifications on Google. And then do your own Googling.
No, actually, I think it's true. I mean, I've learned that you can turn off your AI notifications on Google by, at the top there's a menu thing, and you go all the way to the right and just click on web, and it goes back to the old-fashioned Google without that AI bullshit that is lying and deceitful. So, I mean, I think that these are habits that we can get into ourselves. Yeah.
Just a comment. I grew up in Idaho, and I remember Salino Falls. It was amazing. We drove down the Columbia a lot of times, and I was so sad when that dam was built.
I wonder, there used to be this incredible video at the Wasco County Museum, right next to the Discovery Center, just outside of the Dalles, and it was a film of, is it still there? Salado Falls, and I was doing this documentary about the Columbia River and river that was, I called it, and Lillian Pitt told me about the video, so I went and I got a recording of Salado Falls, and I was actually telling her I need to get some sound of the falls, and I was going to go up to Tomatos Falls, and she said, no, you got to hear Salado Falls, and it was really an amazing experience. I recommend going out to this museum next to the Discovery Center and just watching the Indians and fish and listen to the sound of the falls. Yeah. Yeah.
So this wasn't really touched on, but there's been a lot of noise. There's an article in Social Review about how waste is starting to be shipped out on our highways. So probably 395, I-90, over to Butte, down I-5 to Salt Lake City area west. I mean, you were saying there's no permanent repository, even though we're talking about one of the New Mexico that the feds are. How does this play into the whole, we want more nuclear at Hanford, and what can we as a region do to stop this trucking of highly dangerous waste, on our highways?
I do know that our tribe, well, at our last general council, our tribal fire chief, who against many of us at tribal council when we learned about it a couple of years ago, because the tribe got a $70,000 award for the transportation of some of that mid-level waste. Some of that was pulled because of the DOE contract for emergency services because of that transportation. But other than that, I don't know what else is happening.
I can try to answer a little bit. So there's different classifications, different kinds of waste in Hanford, and we all have different disposal mechanisms, periodically based on how radioactive they are. So under the first Trump administration, new rules came out that essentially looked at high-level radioactive waste, which is that really dangerous stuff I talked about in the tanks, which is the kind of waste that would be produced by nuclear energy, nuclear power. And it's this way to definitionally change it to low-level waste, which then has different disposal mechanisms. Doesn't need to go to a repository, for example. It could be grouted, which is just a form of cement to stabilize it. So that's just a legal on-paper change. The waste isn't changing at all. It's still high-level waste in our opinion. We haven't seen that applied at Hanford. And what you're alluding to with the transportation, so a new agreement came out between the tri-party agencies responsible for cleanup, and that would see either the shipment of liquid or grouted waste, tank waste, so high-level waste from Hanford. It hasn't happened yet. There are still public processes that need to happen and environmental reviews that we are pushing for. Consultation hasn't happened with any of the affected tribes, let alone the communities that this waste would travel through. It's just another example of the complexity of cleanup, the cost of it, and why we shouldn't be adding more waste to it.
So I want to let you know that there's things that you can do, and one of them is to contact your elected officials. And on the back of the Rumble on the River program, there's a list of your elected officials. And contact them and oppose every one of these nuclear bills, even the ones that haven't come to committee yet, and be strong. Also, you can sign in for future Rumble and River Community Forums up at the top of the room. And if you want to comment on any of the, well, this is actually the 4 bills that are right now in committee, I guess, about 5, okay. You can comment by 8 a.m. tomorrow on HB 2038 and HB 2410. So, yeah, we'll take a couple more questions.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say very quick, if it's okay, Barbara.
Sure.
So if you're an Oregon resident, please do comment on the Oregon state legislation. And with regard to the question of moving waste around from one place to another, that's really a very federal and regional issue. So that's a great one for talking to your member of Congress and your U.S. senators to say that you oppose the notion of consolidated interim storage. That's what they're calling it. They don't have a permanent repository, but they want to move forward with consolidated interim storage. Interim is doing a lot of work in that. So that's what you can say, oppose that, but support, at least for now, on-site dry cask storage, because that's like the least bad option that we have right now for existing waste.
Questions?
I would just point out that the Oregon legislature is very public unfriendly. If a bill has been scheduled for a hearing, the website will not accept written testimony from anyone. Bills are typically scheduled for hearing about a week in advance. So you've got a week to submit testimony. After the public hearing is over, you have 48 hours from the beginning of the public hearing. After that, the website rejects your testimony. As the session goes later, the advance notice gets smaller. Sometimes they give no advance notice of the public hearing, and you have no opportunity to submit testimony. That's the way it works.
Okay, one more question?
So I was curious about a little more truth about the drivers behind this. You were talking about nuclear, people making money on it, plants decommissioned, but I'm from Washington. My power company, Puget Sound, is Puget Sound Energy. I just saw a presentation where they were basically talking about how they were we've got the Clean Energy Transformation Act in Washington. We must be off fossil fuels by 2035, I believe. So they're working on this. So when they said that, I assumed, not having heard of nuclear, in a long time, that it was cleaner, cheaper, and than past, or they wouldn't be bringing it back. Now I'm learning today it's not cleaner, cheaper, or safer. So I'm just, but they're not in the business of nuclear. They don't have an incentive. If they've got a deadline of 2035, so why would I'm just speculating, why would Puget Sound Energy be reaching out to this technology given everything you've presented today?
Because there's a lot of money to be made off of it. Even if the project never pencils out, there are a lot of federal incentives for nuclear innovation and research and development and PR and communications. The Georgia Power case, that $36 billion was split about half and half. Half of that was profit for Georgia Power shareholders. So there's a big money to be made on these contracts. And even if a project never even breaks ground, sometimes companies like NuScale Power out of Oregon can still make over, and I'm not kidding, $1 million in single grants from the US government to just pursue possible development in different areas. So.
I would say too, Puget Sound Energy, there's like a dog and pony show out at Columbia Generating Station that a lot of folks from different utilities and different PUDs have gone to, and from tribes, and Energy No Bush talks about they kind of give you this very rosy picture of nuclear that doesn't present the disadvantages that we talked about here today. So I think, you really have to dig underneath the surface, because everything on the surface is like, oh, nuclear is great and shiny and new and, amazing. And I think that there's unfortunately a lot of folks, working for different governments and different PUDs who are kind of buying that and not really looking into the other side of it. So yeah, there's a lot of education to be done of your local utility district.
So I'm sure all of you have a young child that you love. The CEO of Energy Northwest was quoted in the paper not long ago that he trusts a cask so safe that he would let his child go up and hug it. Did you read that one? It's so safe. It won't leak. I let my child go and hug it.
But they don't cite those casks in his backyard.
Of course. Who's going to trust this person? So let's get real about this, people. This is the kind of people that are coming into your neighborhood, and you're going to trust.
If I can one other thing that made me think of, apparently this group was lobbying in Salem last week before we got there, but there is an active group called Mothers for Nuclear. You look, it's basically women that are employed in the nuclear industry who have been mothers, but anyway, yeah. Look at our work, yeah. I got asked